Okay, so in the last video I showed you kind of the long way of computing a mean of a random variable. And like I said, you're not going to be responsible for doing things this way, but I walked through it that way so that you would have a little bit of an idea of what the calculator is doing. And I think that's always a good idea. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you now how we can do this in the calculator. And so we're going to begin in the calculator. We're going to begin this by first entering our different values for the random variable in list 1. So let's enter our x values, or our values of the random variable, in list 1. And then what we're going to do is we're also going to enter our probabilities that correspond with those x values in list 2. Let's fix that. Probabilities. So we'll enter our probabilities in list 2. And then I'm going to show you from there where to go. So I'm going to first just go to Stat, Edit, and I'm going to plug in my list 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then let's go over to list 2 and put in 0.06. Make sure to do this along with me while I'm talking through this video. I think that'll help out. There's also some differences in our calculator that can sometimes make this tricky, and so I want to make sure that hopefully I address those differences in this video also. Okay, so I've got my x values, I've got my probabilities. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the Stat button, and I'm going to go over to Calc, and then I'm going to press one-var stats. And so we've done this before in this class when we want summary statistics. We're going to do it again with our random variables. And so we're going to say, like I said, stat, over to calc, and we're going to press number 1, which is one-var stats. Okay, let's see what happens. So I press enter. Notice it says list L1, but we put our discrete random variable in L1, and we put our corresponding probabilities, or what's known as frequencies, in L2. So I'm going to go down to, let's fix that. Let's go down and put L2 in our frequency list. Now, when you leave this module, be aware that some of you that especially have this format of a calculator will now have L2 in the frequency list, so you may need to delete that later on in this course. So just keep in mind when you press one-var stats, if you're just doing a summary of a single set of data, we just had L1, but if you're dealing with these probability distributions of discrete random variables, we've got an L1 and L2. And then I can go hit calculate, and I get the same mean that we got before, 2.23, because the calculator just has this exact formula programmed into it. And if you scroll down, you see you have some other things also. We've got the standard deviation. You can see that the standard deviation of our discrete random variable is 1.0474, etc. You could square that to get a variance. If you were ever asked for a variance in Connect. And while those are helpful, I think in this module you're going to find the question of finding the mean to be the more common one. And so again, our mean was 2.23, whether we calculated it by hand or we did it in the calculator. Now, not all of you are going to have a calculator set up that looked like mine. Some of you are going to have the calculator set up that we've talked about before that looks like, let's see, I'm going to make a little bit of a change here. I'm going to take my stat wizards off. You typically want them on so that you can have a setup like what I just had. But if we take stat wizards off and we go back to stat calc, one-var stats, whoops. Yep, now with the stat wizards off, we don't have that frequency list prompt anymore, and so we need to actually communicate with the calculator here to put in to look at both L1 and L2. So I am saying one-var stats L1 comma L2, and this is only for those of you who who have an older version of the calculator, who don't have the ability to put the stat wizards on, like we have seen before. And when you press enter, notice you get the exact same numbers again. So the process in the calculator, it's consistently going to be stat calc. You're going to go to one-var stats, and if you have a frequency list, prompt in the calculator, then make sure that you put L2 in that frequency list. While in your regular list you put in L1. But if you don't have those prompts because you don't have the stat wizards or you have an older calculator, then you need to do what I was saying about writing it as one-var stats, and then actually getting in the L1 comma L2 on your own by saying second number 1 comma second number 2. But that is it. This is the calculator tool in Module 6, and as long as you can go through these few steps right here, then you're going to be able to calculate means of random variables, variances, and standard deviations. One final note. If you look at these results in the calculator, the sample standard deviation is not there. And there's a reason for that. The reason is when we plugged in to our list, if we go back to stat edit, when we plugged in our random variable values as well as their corresponding probabilities, when we're doing that, we're kind of acknowledging that we know everything about the group that we're summarizing, about the random variable that we're talking about, or about the population that we're talking about. And so if we know everything about our population, the calculator is saying, yeah, you're accounting for 100% of the group that you're summarizing here. The calculator kind of says, all right, well, we're not interested in a sample. When we, whoops, I should be doing stat calc. I guess I have to say second 1 comma second 2. The calculator says we don't have to compute a sample, because they're acknowledging, since they're giving us all of the probabilities and the probabilities add up to 100%, that they have 100% of the group that they're describing. So you won't see a sample standard deviation when you are computing, when you are doing one-var stats and you have entered probabilities in your frequency list. Okay, and I will show you another example of how, a more practical example of how this material is applied in the next video.